We're looking at Chapter 7 in our text. The topic for this chapter is navigation. We're going to be reinforcing some concepts that you should already know, looking at how you work with these features inside of the .NET environment, and then looking at some new techniques that you may have not seen before. In fact, I can guarantee you probably haven't. And then we'll look at some of the tools that ASP.NET has available to it to help make your life a little bit easier in this regard. Topics for the chapter are the 4 bullets here at the top. And I'm very quickly scrolling down here. There it is. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these things that we have built in. ASP.NET has a few controls that work with the menu. You can see they have them highlighted right here, or indicated right here, and I'll put a highlight on them. But they basically have a tool for doing menus, for doing a tree view, and doing a sitemap. And what's interesting is the environment, because it is a framework that kind of builds things up for you automatically. As you add pages and stuff, it's got tools built in to recognize what all those pages are, their hierarchy, and can map it out for you automatically, which is a really, it's kind of a powerful thing. You can also manually do all this stuff, but a lot of people aren't aware of that. Now, one of the files that will get generated as you're working like this is a file called Sitemap Path, I believe. I think we were just looking at it on the screen. Web sitemap, and that will appear in your project folder. Let's talk a little bit about links first, just to kind of refresh your memory. Now, when you learn to code in HTML, you do your first links, you learn the anchor tag, and you also learn the href attribute that allows you to link from page to page. And that's how you start with HTML. You write the links and you hard code them. ASP.NET does have controls that do that same thing for you. So for example, if I use this ASP.NET directive, you can see hyperlink, and then you can also point to a page that you're going to and the link text. And then what happens is it will execute on the server when the page is requested, and then the server will write basically that same HTML. Now, your question would be, why on earth would I bother to do that, right? Well, the reason you would bother to do that is, let's say you have a link for you can log in here. You don't need to give the person the link if they are already logged in. So you would actually run a script that would say, if already logged in, don't show them this link, show them that link. The link you would probably show them is log out, right? Carl?
You could tie it into something programmatically also, probably to like if their usernames are already logged in, right?
Yeah, you can tie it. I mean, sky's the limit here. I mean, this is just a snippet of code, and it can be part of a conditional statement or the result of some math or what have you. So there's many different reasons why you would do it programmatically, but as many as you could probably imagine. All right. I know you guys probably know this stuff already. You know what URL stands for, and you know how to link from pages to pages or pages within a site and how to navigate up and down folder structure. But just in case you don't remember, you can link directly to a file. And let's take a look at this example here, this first one, where we have a page that we're linking to. And let's say we were actually on the default ASPX page, which is in the root of our project here, and we wanted to navigate to the default page that's inside the management folder. In that case, from the location of this file to that file, you have to find the folder and then go into that folder and find the file. And so you would write folder and then file name. And it's relative to the location of the file that you are linking from. All right, and that's a pretty common way to do things. Now, if you were, let's say, going to look for this images file or this header JPEG that they have listed here, and you can see that they have that file in this folder. If I am in the root, I wouldn't need this first part right here. And you guys should know that the // indicates you first need to go up a folder. So if I was in this default file, I could omit the little thing I highlighted. However, if I'm in this file and I need to get to that folder, I have to go up a folder level and then into images into the file. And you guys realize that. And if you need to go up several folder levels, well, you just keep adding .. until you get there. All right. One way you can work around that is to use what we call root-based relative URLs. And a lot of times when you're starting to learn HTML, both the textbooks and the instructors often will kind of skip over this with intent, because they really want you to understand how to navigate folders. But a technique that you do see a lot of people using is a folder location that is relative to the root of the site as opposed to the file that you're currently on. What's nice about that is it allows you to move that file you're currently on to any folder and the link still works, right? Because it's relative to the root of the project, not to the location of the file. So like, for example, if I decided to go back up here and take this default page and add a few folders and go a few folders deep, or change its name and put it up in the root, that link, if I set it up this way, will work either way, right? Except I'm using the example of this file as, well, I think you guys understand what I mean though. So
this link is portable, that you can get that link in any page.
yes.
Because it's not relative to where you are, it's relative.
Yeah, it's relative to where you're going, given the location of the root of the project. Okay, it's not relative to your current position. And I'll tell you, this relative URL things, you know, when you start out doing HTML, it confuses you a little bit. But after a while, you know, you figure it out. Like, why isn't my image showing? And it's like, well, it's in the images folder, or, you know, you're a folder deep and you have to go up and back in. All right, so if we were to actually run and generate a root relative URL using programmatic constructs, so you see at the top of this page, we're actually using an ASP control for image, and notice the image URL has got this little squiggle there, right? The little tilde, which is the shift of the tab key, or the reverse apostrophe key above the tab key. And that's something that you guys probably haven't seen before. If you have, you wondered what it was about and just kind of moved on. And this little directive here does essentially the same thing. So it's relative to the root of the project. So what it's going to do is it's going to understand one little complication further than just relative to the root of the project. And let me explain. When you guys are working with WordPress, and maybe some of the, you know, my regular students who will listen to this video won't know this, but when you install WordPress, WordPress likes to install itself in the WordPress directory, right? But usually when you do websites, you want your website to be in the root of your folder structure. So why is it that it works as a website while it's still in a separate folder? ASP.NET does the same thing, and you might say, why on earth would you do that? And a lot of it is just basically to organize files. So in other words, in my folder structure, this might be my project, but I might create another folder called Site, for example, that really is where all the stuff is located. Now, ASP.NET is intelligent. We don't use an index page to start with. We use default by default, but I can always take any of the pages, right-click, set a start page, so when I go to the website, it doesn't matter what it's called, it'll go to that file. It doesn't matter if it's in this folder, it could be one folder deep with the whole rest of your site, right? So what this allows us to do is it recognizes where the root of your site is, even if it's nested a few folders deep. And the file that you're coming from is outside that structure. You see where I'm going with that? So it understands where your site is located inside the folder structure and navigates to it. It is still relative to the root, but the root isn't really at the root of the folder structure. Make sense? It is the live website root, not file root. Okay? So if you think in terms of like your WordPress projects where it put everything in a WordPress folder, it knows to go to the WordPress folder. It's really just as simple as that. It finds a starting point for the site and then navigates from there. Now the output of that would look, like this when it came out in the URL, because it still works off that relative approach. But then when you see that, just so you understand what it means, it's not a big deal. You don't necessarily have to use that, but a lot of times when you're generating automatic components, it'll throw that in, whether you like it or not, and just so you understand the meaning of it. And there's always what we call absolute URLs, and those would be the actual address that you would type into a browser window address bar to go directly to that item, whether in this case it's an image or whatever it happens to be. When in doubt, you don't know how to relatively locate something, you can always do that, and it always works. No. Well, I guess I shouldn't say no. Is it slower? I'd say the jury's out on that. It might be a little slower. Either way, as long as it gets to where it's going. Now, we were just talking about the default documents, and remember I was doing this where I could right-click and set as start page. That whatever I set as the start page is considered the default document, even if it's not called default. If no start page is declared, default in the root of your folder structure is the default. That's just how the Microsoft Web stuff works. All right, so going back to those three things that I highlighted way up at the top of this chapter, Sitemap Path, Tree View, and Menu, we have these controls that are available. And what they've done, which is nice in this little graphic, is they just give us basically the appearance of what these things look like when they're put on a page. You can see they put all three of them on, right? So you guys know what a path statement is. It just shows you where in the hierarchy of the folder structure you're located. And sometimes it's not even the hierarchy of the folder structure, especially when you start to move away from traditional ASP.NET and static websites, and you start to move into MVC architecture where these things are automatically generated, where the URLs have nothing to do with the location of the files. And that's something you guys are going to learn in the coming weeks. But Model View Controller. Okay, and then take a look at the tree view. This just shows the hierarchy. I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Then you have the menu view, which just shows like what stuff is on the menu, okay, that you've designated. And of course, you know that you don't have to put everything on the menu, right? Not every page has to be listed. All right. So when you're working with this stuff, you're going to end up seeing that you have basically what is an XML file that's going to be part of your project that is going to show the actual sitemap of your site. Now this can be automatically generated, and it can be manually generated as well. So it can be controlled. So let's say you automatically generate it, you can go in there and tweak it, or maybe you don't want that to happen at all, and you can control it on your own. But basically what this does, using XML syntax, is it plots out all the stuff that would go into those menu structures, and then can utilize that to dynamically generate those menu navigation pieces for you. It also can be used to take a list of pages that you have and automatically add them to your menu. Can you see like the advantage there? Right, you go through and you create a bunch of pages, go through a few little procedures, and your whole menu is built for you. So that can be very, very useful. Remember the other thing that's really useful about sitemaps on websites is it's a great spot for search engines to land on and crawl your whole site. And it kind of also gives you a way to control what they're crawling for. The rule of thumb is when a search engine looks through a site, the way that it works is it needs to have a way, first of all, to know that the site is even there. So somebody is linking to it somewhere, It's listed in the search engine. It's listed on somebody else's page, or you've submitted your link to a service like DMOZ, like what we've talked about. But once you put things on that sitemap, then Google can crawl it. If pages are not listed on that sitemap, hypothetically, they should not be findable. I don't know if you guys have realized this yet, but like when you guys do your work and you put it up on Kronos, eventually, depending on how you're linked up, that stuff will show up on Google. So I just want you to be aware of that. It's not like we don't block search traffic on there. It goes in provided it knows it's there to look for it. All right, so they're looking at how that file is put together. You have an exercise that will walk you through that, so I'm not going to belabor it here. All right, then they start talking about the menu control. So that's actually one of these objects that you can pull into the project, just like you do a button or a text field or a label or something like that. So they have a pre-built construct for it, and it shows all the different properties that come with it. I'm not going to really go through all these, but I think a lot of them are pretty obvious. All right, they'll walk you through the whole process of adding the menu control. And if you look at the code that happens here, you have the sitemap file already created. You set up a section on your page with the nav tag. And then you run this little menu control, and guess what happens? It pulls in all the sitemap stuff and builds your menu. I mean, that is really cool. I mean, you know, that's one of the advantages of working in this platform. It realizes that when you're building it, where are you pulling it in from? A sitemap you've already created using the built-in construct. Or if you haven't done it that way and you just, like, let's say, put it in an XML file, you then can choose that XML file and pull it in as well. Carl?
Does Dynamics, if you add pages, it'll automatically update?
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty powerful, right? Yeah. All right, and they go through how it works. Of course, if you want to style this stuff, there are tools for doing that. And what's kind of fun here is you guys have worked a little bit with like doing like hover effects with CSS. A few of you over the course of your studies have played with some of the more challenging stuff, which is like not only hover effects with menus, but drop downs and multiple expanding things. And that's a challenge to do, especially the first couple of times you do it. I mean, there's a lot to learn and a lot of logic that goes with it. The beauty here is that they have these menu controls, and those have just little property settings that you can go in and click, 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 change colors, hover effects, boom, and you got the whole thing going. So why do people use this authoring environment? There's one of the reasons. They have an exercise on doing that as well. I won't belabor that either. They also have this thing called Tree View. It has a bunch of properties that go with. Once again, I'm not going to belabor them. But they do walk you through the process here of setting up the control to do it, and then what all the little parameters are. That's actually a pretty fun little exercise as well. All right. So they also have the sitemap control, and as exactly what it sounds like, it builds that sitemap using a lot of the same resources. And their exercise basically shows the building of a breadcrumb trail. So if you guys are familiar with what that is, right? And depending on the kind of site that you're operating, like if you have a site that's got a lot of logical divisions to it with a lot of subcategories and pages, and you end up, 10 folders deep, sometimes it is helpful for the user to see where they're at, especially if they want to back out. Like when I'm using Blackboard, for example, I use that tool quite a bit.
Might be helpful, like with the portfolio site, because you can use categories, subcategories.
Yeah, it might be. That's really on you, like if you choose to do that. Now, doing a breadcrumb, I mean, you can create a breadcrumb on a web page manually. It's absolutely possible. The point here is to do it programmatically. So it automatically recognizes where in the hierarchy you are, and then based upon the sitemap file that you have, just builds it out, and you basically just drop the code in there and it just happens. And that's really what happens in this exercise. And then you'll end up with something that looks like that, and that's pretty cool. All right, I think we're getting down to the end here. All right, now we often go to websites, and I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this. You go to a website, you land on it, or you think you're landing on it, and there's code written in the background which takes you somewhere else, right? Now, some people think that's malicious, and it can be. And that's one of the tricks that people use to get people to, click on viruses and things like that, is they'll get like a link in an email, they go to the website, and then it looks pretty inane, and all of a sudden the website itself is taking you somewhere else and doing God knows what. Now, really, it still requires you to approve installing software to make bad things happen, but it can sure make it seem like, something bad's going on. One thing that happens as well is when you're working on more complex sites, you will be working with redirects where you're being taken other places, and sometimes it's not for a bad reason, it's actually for a very valid reason, because you might be pulling in resources from different places, and depending on your decisions, or let's say you're logged in so you get access to a different set of tools, or you fit into this user group so you get this set of tools, and you're automatically redirected to those resources. Now, we can control those things by writing code, which is kind of a fun thing. So in C#, the approach is basically to use this, and notice the syntax that goes with. So by default, when we create stuff in Visual Studio in this sort of a format, so if I bring up this default page, open up the code behind, you'll see that one of the default things that it creates is the page load thing, and that just happens automatically. And the point, of course, is as soon as the page load, it runs a script and does whatever. The one that's here in the book says response, redirect permanent, and what does it do? It takes you to a different file. All right, that's on page load. So I can set up a website, so I'm going to a page, and all of a sudden it puts me somewhere else. It's not really considered very nice to the user, and that's not typical that you do that. Usually it will be the result of some decision that's being made, or some condition that's being made, or some state of the browser, being logged in, for example, or not being logged in, that type of thing. Cookie set, cookie not set. All right, so there are little exercises on doing that. That's kind of a fun one too. And then we have what we call server-side redirects. All right, let's talk about server-side redirects. Server-side redirects are where we can create, I'm trying to think of the most elegant way to say this, where we can create URLs that take users somewhere else in an elegant way. Because the question I always get with this is why? Well, the why is, take a look at the two links that appear at the top of the page. And notice how the one has a setup that's really easy to read. It says Cars Volvo 850 T5, right? And it appears to be one thing. But as it says here, under the hood, the server might transfer to a more proper URL, which is actually a GET statement, right? So what this is indicating to you is it's loading up that page, but after it gets to this page, after this question mark, there's some form stuff that's being pushed back and forth to the application somewhere. Okay, so I got interrupted there for a second. But basically, when we're seeing things that follow the URL, this is information that's being passed and posted to a form or a database or something that triggers you getting the stuff up on the screen that you see. So it's a very common thing, especially when you guys are going to get into MVC, you're going to see that architecture does this automatically, where it takes something that might look like this and just make it look like that. So the truth is, the link on the page, even when you hover on it, might look like this, but in the background, what it's really doing is this. Okay?
First link, a valid link, if you put it in.
This one right here?
If you manually put that in, does it work?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. It depends. Okay, we're going to my it depends, Carl. If I manually typed it in, would it work? It depends on how the site's configured. Okay, you'd have to be set to make sure it works right. All right, so that's one of the reasons why you would do something like that. When you guys get to MVC, what you're going to learn that's really neat is that when your URL is built, it is not built on files at all. It's built on programming structure. So if I was looking at cars, it's because you're looking at a model or a view of a car, and then all the pieces that follow are little parameters or methods within that particular object. So that you guys will have, well, next week you'll start looking at stuff like that. Right. Once again, they have a little exercise here for you guys to put in, which is fun, and then they give you a couple of tips, and I think that is the chapter. So at this point, you should proceed and work on Chapter 7. I do have videos walking through that as well. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. And hopefully my YouTube live stream experimentation worked. And we'll see you in the next video.